Hey everybody, Rory here with another update from this week. Here on another hot day at our Gonzalez Vineyard. Small vineyard we have, just about 7 acres, mostly planted to Zinfandel, although there's a little bit of Petit Syrah and a little bit of Carignan here as well. Some of you who are wine club members maybe, or have tasted some of the older wine club wines, we did a 2014 single vineyard Gonzalez. Gonzalez, when it's on, is just absolutely fabulous. Gonzalez has had some problems with disease the last couple of years, so we've kind of spent the last several years rebuilding it from the root up, and we'll get to see some of the literal fruits of that labor and some of the labor in progress going on with that. So we'll turn this camera around and I'll show you, we've been talking about bloom and everything, it's getting into set, and we'll start to see our first few real live berries for this year. So let's check it out. So you can see here the vine rows. We are in the Cuneo block of Zinfandel here, which means this is all Zinfandel on St. George using a clone called Cuneo, which is an old vineyard over in Sonoma, and that's essentially the clone. Zinfandel often takes the form of showing up in different kind of vineyard selections. So Haines Vineyard selection, Concannon Vineyard selection, Baldocci, Cuneo, and this is in the Cuneo block. Get up close here, we can finally, after a few updates of teasing, see some real berries, see some set in Zinfandel. This is what you would call a pretty good set. It's not crazy full or anything like that, which can actually be a problem if there are too many berries in Zinfandel, but this is fairly, what you're looking for is fairly evenly sized berries, and I think we have that this year. This is a pretty good set. It's very exciting, because you can see that this vine is not very old. This is probably a 4-year-old vine. This was replanted 4 years ago after a pretty deadly wave of Pierce's disease affected this entire vineyard. You can see, looking down these vine rows, you see a lot of young vines. This vineyard was originally planted in 2004, but we've had to replant probably, conservatively, I'd say 75% of this vineyard has been replanted in the last 5 years. And it's, it's been a big challenge and everything, but it's fun to see some of the successes along the way, seeing these vines come back up the stake. You can see some holes of where we're still working on bringing vines back. And that's kind of one of the other things we're doing right now, which is budding over new vines. So this is actually called spring budding, where we're taking a Zinfandel bud and grafting it onto the St. George rootstock that we planted last year. These vines wouldn't have been quite big enough to bud last fall. Instead, we waited for this spring to let them have another winter to get big, and then we put the Zinfandel on there. So we just saw the vine that just got budded over just now. 1 year later, if all goes according to plan, that vine will look like this. You can see where you have the old root coming out of the ground, and then where the new shoot came out just this spring and started growing up the stake and turning into a real Zinfandel vine. So out of that one single bud, you have the entire growth of the vine. This one's coming up the stake. It'll soon be trained to form, and soon, transform into something just a little bit older and a little bit more mature, and that's how the vine comes to be. I'm going to show you guys a cool video of the, or cut in a little clip here of the actual budding process, because it's something pretty cool, and something we take a lot of pride in. Here Louise is uncovering the vine. It's a St. George vine, and exposing the stalk on there, making sure it's nice and clean. Now he's just cut the bud off of the stick of Baldocci clone Zinfandel. He's going to prepare the budding site, making a notch with the knife, cutting out an equal size notch in the stalk of the root to fit the bud, notches the bud in there, pushes it in. Now takes a little budding tape, secures the bud in place with just a little bit of white tape. Tying it securely around. This tape will expand with the bud, so it's never going to constrict the growth of the bud, and then cuts the head of the St. George off. You only cut the head off right at the point of budding during spring budding, which is what we're doing right now. And out of this little bud, right in the center, comes a Zinfandel vine in a few years. The focus on having a full-time crew and promoting the kinds of skills like field budding is a fairly rare deal these days. Most of that stuff is contracted out. We decide to train internally and reward internally that kind of expertise, which is something that's, they make it look easy, and it just, I invite you out to come and try it, because it's not easy. It's really hard, but it's very cool, and it's very essential to kind of the long-term maintenance of a vineyard and keeping things going. So just wanted to point out one other thing that, we talked about the Cunio clone in the other block. This is the Haines clone. Haines, I pointed out last week, as being kind of the granddaddy of Napa Valley Zinfandel vineyards. And this is budwood that we took from the Haines vineyard. And, it's just to speak about clones for a second, it's, while the clones do taste different and they end up with different flavors, a lot of what we talk about when we talk about clones and their impact in viticulture has to do with kind of how they form. From my personal observations, Zinfandel is, in general, an irregular setter. You'll get berries that are of different sizes when they set, but the Haines clone tends to set a little bit more evenly, just on average. You still get some irregularity, but on average it's a little more even than Cunio or Dickerson clones or other clones of Zinfandel. I think that leads to flavor differences. I think that gives a nice even kind of richness to the Haines clone when we make this as a separate do little trial experiments with this as a separate clone, whereas the Cunios and Baldocchis and the Dickersons especially can be irregularly looking, but will be sometimes a little more exotic, but also a little bit less consistent with their character. And so it's just a little thing about clones and Zinfandel that are kind of fun. The Haines clone happens to be my favorite little block on this ranch, and it's kind of interesting. This is just a small block of 468 vines. And we talked about replanting a lot of this vineyard. Here is one of 4 remaining vines from the original planting. All 464 of the other vines in this block died sometime after 2014 and were replanted due to Pierce's disease. We may do a deep dive on Pierce's disease at some point in the future, especially talking about kind of some of the new innovations we're coming up with to defend against it. But pest and disease, a real thing out here in the vineyard. So kind of interesting to figure out why this lone survivor is still around. Anyway, just a fun little thing about this tiny little block that happens to be one of my favorite blocks of Zinfandel here at Frogs Lake. So that's the update for this week. Just seeing set pop up everywhere, including in Cabernet. So far, it's looking like a pretty good set overall. Getting kind of into an exciting phase where we get the first kind of peek at what the vintage is going to look like. It's another hot day. It's been a dry year so far. We've had some up and down weather, but so far the vines seem to be pulling right through it, not really being slowed down too much. They're definitely still growing like crazy. So we're in the middle of growing season and we're just going to keep rolling. Anyway, hope you're all well.